Hi, I'm Jeff Sikkenga, Executive Director of the Ashbrook Center, and this is The American Idea, where we discuss the ideas, people, and events that have made America what it is today. We believe that by understanding our history and our principles, we can better live up to the promise of the American founding and preserve our ongoing experiment in self-government. Welcome to The American Idea. Well, I want to welcome everyone to this episode of The American Idea. Today we're joined by a familiar face to many people, Vivek Ramaswamy. Vivek, thanks for joining us today.
It's good to be here.
You just had a great conversation with our Ashbrook scholars, students asking you some really good, tough questions, thoughtful questions on your policy stands. I'm going to take a little bit of different tack for this, not ask you so much about your policy stands, which a lot of people, you've been very candid and forthright in what your positions are and why you hold them, but your run as a presidential candidate. What's one of the most important things that you learned in the process of running for the nomination for president?
Learned so many things. And actually, you can do something like this for the first time. There's probably a million small things I would do differently. Okay. The first big picture is I'm deeply grateful to the people of this country and to my family for letting me do it, actually. It was the experience of a lifetime. I learned a lot about not just this country, but about myself and my own convictions. And not just the what of what I believe, but the why, actually. So it's a weird thing to say, hey, I recommend it to everybody. but not quite that. But I do think it was probably a more personally, intellectually, maybe even spiritually enriching experience than anything I can remember in my life. And so I'm still processing a lot of that. One thing I would say is I probably let my competitive instincts take over at certain points in the process because it's a blood sport.
Right.
But competition wasn't the why that pulled me in. And I cared about the future direction of this country. I cared about the future existence of this country. And I feel like I'm back in touch with that now after the campaign in a way that was really true on the day I entered the campaign. I think part of what, for me, was unique was most people in this country didn't know who I was. And so for the first 6 months, it was all about 24/7, any media interview, any opportunity to campaign. We're just going around the clock, maximizing talk to everybody. But that got me in a mode where that's what I ran on for the rest of the campaign. It was based on sheer momentum and energy of doing as much as possible, but it didn't leave a lot of time to actually take steps back and to think. Even before that first debate, I think the other candidates were taking time off of campaigning. We went full. I was in 9 states in the lead up in that weekend right to that first debate, as I remember it. And if I were to do it again, I would say I would probably take a couple hours at least each day to think, actually, and to just re-anchor myself on why we're doing this rather than approaching it at times what felt like a competitive sport and an exercise of competition. There's more to it than that. And that'd be the advice I would give myself a year ago.
So that's very interesting because one of the things that's sort of a characteristic of you and your articulation of your positions, as you said, is not just the what, but the why. And you have not shied away from talking about fundamental principles and thinking that those principles ought to be guiding the way public officials speak and actually decide. Yeah. Where have you drawn your first and fundamental principles from?
A lot of it comes from my faith and my upbringing. I think God puts each of us here for a purpose, and it is our moral duty to realize that purpose. And that's the tradition I was raised in, and I think it's what guides me. As an American, part of what grounds my set of principles are the principles enshrined in our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence. That's what it means to be an American. It's a beautiful flag we have. But it means more than just the cloth that we print the red, white, and blue on. It symbolizes a set of ideals and principles that set this country into motion. And so I think that when I remember this, I'm looking at a picture of George Washington backstage right here. When I think about the sacrifices that our founding fathers made and the demands for them to actually have to create it the first time around, how much easier is it for us? The sacrifices we have to make are what? Speaking our mind in the open, even when it's unpopular? Maybe face some consequence, it pales in comparison to what our founding fathers were asked to do. Yeah. When I think about the principles we have to follow, we don't have to reinvent them. We just have to follow the ones that we have been bequeathed. And so for me, that's also part of what, in my study of history, and I think it's part of why what goes on here at this university is so important. My study of history is also what gives me that sense of obligation as well. Yeah. And, the combination of faith, the upbringing I had, my sense of gratitude to this country. I've lived an American dream that my parents would have never imagined when they came to this country 40 years ago, that I would be living the life I am and raising our kids under circumstances that would have been beyond their wildest dreams. That sense of gratitude and purpose, I think, is part of what gives me my grounding in principle.
Before we continue with our conversation, I'd like to take a moment and ask you to learn a little more about the Ashbrook Center and how you can help us continue our work with teachers, students, and citizens.
I'm Chad Kiefer, Director of Philanthropy and Strategic Partnerships here at Ashbrook. At its heart, America's story is about the lives of patriots who have given their last full measure of devotion to preserve and protect what it means to be an American. But the tragic truth is that the American story is being rewritten as one of oppression and despair. Back in 1776, the founders took a chance when they created a new government built on principles of liberty. They took a chance on America. Now I'm challenging you to do the same. Your gift to Ashbrook today reaches students, teachers, and citizens across the country, helping them to understand why America is worthy of their devotion. With so many forces eroding our history and taking away from our principles, isn't it time we give America a chance? Your investment is encouraged now more than ever. Please visit us today at ashbrook.org/support.
So it's the American idea. It's the Ashbrook Center. As you know, we love history.
Okay, good.
And we always like to ask our guests this question. And maybe it's a little unfair question, but we always like to ask it. If you could pick a favorite person in U.S. history, a favorite person in U.S. history.
It's definitely an unfair question.
Who might that be?
Probably Thomas Jefferson.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Why?
Probably Thomas Jefferson. Because he was a slaveholder. No, I'm just kidding. I say that in jest because that's all you hear about Thomas Jefferson anymore. Is, he was a slaveholder. Well, did he err? Yeah, he did. Did he live up to his principles in the same way that Jesus Christ would have? No, because he's a fallen human being. All of us are. We're not a nation of gods. We're a nation of men who have ideals and we strive for them. And for me, he embodies that. I think that's actually makes him more interesting, is that he's so much more like us, a guy who has ideals, strived to live up to them, fell short of them because he's a human being, but still provided a shining light for a nation that followed nearly 250 years later. A guy who was intellectually curious. I mean, he nearly bankrupted himself several times over, building libraries, donating books to libraries across this country. Think about public servants today making money off public service. Here's using his own private fortune in service of the public he wanted to serve. And so I just think in so many ways he's an interesting guy. I talked in that room with the students. The swivel chair that I'm sitting in right now was invented by Thomas Jefferson while writing the Declaration of Independence.
In fact, you talked about what a polymath he was. He learned it in so many subjects and languages.
He was fluent in something upwards of 8 languages, could write 3 more, could read 3 more. He was a guy who, he was an intellectual. He was the first and, I don't want to say the last, but the first and almost last intellectual that we had as a U.S. president. And so I think that's a pretty cool thing. Little Lewis and Clark expeditions that he signed off on. I mean, the Louisiana Purchase. I mean, these are daring, pioneering acts that go far beyond political philosophy. And to combine that with a guy who also had a grounding in a political philosophy that undergirded our Declaration of Independence, I just think that's pretty awesome. Yeah. And so, he'd be my... If I had to pick one, if you make me.
Fair enough. It's a rare, it's a rare combination, as you say, more common among the founding generation than perhaps any time, any place in human history, and certainly much less common, unfortunately, today.
Yes, it is, but it doesn't have to stay that way. You know? We have our ups and downs. There wasn't just one rise and fall of Rome. There were many rises and there were many falls. Yeah. And I think it will be much the same with this American Republic as well. And so, I think there's a lot that's unfortunate, but I think that there's also a lot that lies ahead if we choose it to be so.
And we hope that the kind of education the students you met today cultivates those kind of intellectual, principled leaders.
I was I mean, I still came out of that room. I'm still shell-shocked by how sharp many of those questions were from sophomores, juniors, people who are still finding their own bearings and what their views are to be able to be as well studied and informed and passionate as they were, and smart, just downright intelligent too, many of them. I could just take that away from their questions. Congrats for everything you're doing here. And thanks for letting me be part of it in some small way.
Well, thanks for joining us today on this episode of The American Idea.
Yeah.
We appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The American Idea. If you enjoyed this episode, remember to subscribe at Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and leave a 5-star review. If you want to learn more or get involved in Ashbrook's vital work, visit our website, ashbrook.org.